What would you do if your dad burned your son's stuff? That was the last keepsake my late wife left for my son. That Pokemon card collection was worth $15,000. But for my son, it was his whole childhood, his memories of mom, everything he had left. I dove my hands into the fire trying to save it. My skin got burned, but it was too late. That night, I kicked my parents out of my house. But the consequences my family had to face after that Christmas night would be a lesson burned deep into all our minds. Before I delve into the details of the story, I would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. Hello everyone, I'm Darren Holloway, 34, living in a small town near Columbus, Ohio. I work as an AC repair technician, a job where summers are so busy you don't have time for lunch, and winters you're sitting around, praying someone's heater breaks. It's not glamorous work, but it's enough to keep my son and me going day by day. The story I'm sharing with you today happened last Christmas Eve. My wife, Grace, passed away 5 years ago from cervical cancer. She fought for 14 months, and I still remember those final days at Riverside Hospital like it was yesterday. Jamie was only 6 then, too young to understand why mom couldn't move around, why her hair fell out, why she got thinner every day. A week before Grace died, she called Jamie over to her bedside and gave him this holographic Charizard Pokemon card she'd kept since she was 8. Her voice was so weak when she told him, "Every time you look at this card, remember I love you. This fire dragon will protect you for me." And from that moment on, the kid started collecting. For 5 years, Jamie saved every single penny. Summers, he'd sell lemonade on the corner of Maple Avenue, 50 cents a cup. Even when business was slow, even when he'd sit there for hours without a single customer, the kid would patiently wait with his crooked cardboard sign. In the winter, he'd go door to door asking neighbors if he could shovel their driveways. $5 a walkway. Some weeks, Jamie made $20. Some weeks, his hands were red from the cold, and he didn't make a dime. But my son never gave up. And I always believed that's how he could get stronger, because later on, he would have a whole family to take care of. Every night before bed, I'd see Jamie sitting on his bed, opening his binder and flipping to the first page, where his mom's card was. The kid would stare at it for a long time, then whisper, "Good night, Mom." Sometimes I'd stand outside his room, listening to my son talk to his mother, and my chest felt like someone was squeezing the life out of me. One time, I asked Jamie why he didn't buy games or toys like other kids. The kid looked up at me with eyes way older than his years and said, "I like cards better, Dad. Every time I open a new pack, I feel like Mom's sitting right next to me, waiting with me to see what's inside." That collection was Jamie's whole world. It was how my son kept Mom close when she was no longer here. And I thought that collection would be safe forever. But I guess I was wrong. The most significant danger didn't come from thieves or house fires. It came from the very people I called family. And it all started on Christmas night when I invited my parents and brother over to my house for the first time in years. After years of celebrating at my parents' place, thinking it'd be a fresh start for our family relationship, I never could have imagined it would become hell for my son. I still remember the cheerful atmosphere at the beginning of that Christmas night, as if it were yesterday, filled with laughter and warmth that I thought would last forever. The Christmas tree sparkled in the corner of the living room. The fireplace was roaring, flames dancing warm and bright. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles filled the air. Everything looked like a perfect Christmas card. My parents arrived first. My dad, Warren Holloway, walked in with that straight-backed stride like always. He was 68 that year, retired after 35 years as a steel mill supervisor in Youngstown. My mom, Patrice, followed behind with a tray of still warm apple pie, that kind smile she always wore. Then my brother, Craig, showed up with his daughter, Sloane. Craig is 3 years younger than I, works as an accountant for some insurance company in Cleveland, and is always proud of making more money than his brother, who fixes air conditioners. But I didn't care what Craig was proud of. To me, family was family, no matter our differences. Blood's still thicker than water. At least, that's what I believed until that night. At first, I didn't pay much attention to what the kids were doing together. They kept running around the house, their laughter echoing everywhere. I was busy in the kitchen checking on the turkey, occasionally glancing out to make sure nobody was falling or breaking anything. Sloane was a year older than Jamie, but the two of them played together pretty well. Then I saw both kids sneak into Jamie's room. A few minutes later, they came back to the living room with Jamie carrying his binder. What kid doesn't want to show off their toys a little? Jamie was no different. Heck, I was way worse than him when I was little. I remember when I was 10. My mom had just bought me a red Schwinn bike, and I wheeled it into the middle of Thanksgiving dinner to make my cousins jealous. Dad yelled at me for getting the floor dirty. Still makes me laugh thinking about it. So, when I saw Jamie sit down on the couch and open his binder to show Sloane, I just smiled and went back to the kitchen. My mom was helping me set the table, and my dad was sitting in his recliner, watching football and occasionally throwing in commentary with Craig about the Ohio State game. From where I was standing, I could still hear Jamie explaining each card to Sloane. The kid's voice was full of pride. Jamie pointed to each one and said, "This one's a special edition Pikachu. I got it at the Target on Sawmill Road. And this one's a Mutuo. I traded with a kid at school for 3 other cards." Sloane sat next to him, curiously flipping through each page. Looking at her then, nobody would think this was a kid who'd lost her mom when she was 3. Sloane's mother just left without a word. Vanished. One morning, Craig woke up to find empty closets and a note on the kitchen table. That was it. Since then, my parents have always spoiled Sloane to make up for their granddaughter missing her mom. And the girl got used to getting whatever she wanted. I stood in the kitchen, looking out and watched the 2 kids sitting next to each other, their heads bent over the binder. In that moment, I told myself, maybe this year will be okay. Maybe the love of an extended family will help Jamie miss his mom a little less each day. Maybe inviting them over was the right decision. Then Jamie flipped to the first page. Grace's Charizard was there, sparkling under the light. Sloane pointed at it, her eyes lighting up, and said to Jamie, "This one's so pretty. Let me borrow it, Jamie." Immediately, Jamie looked up, shook his head, and answered, "Not this one, Sloane. This was my mom's. You can look at another one, any other one's fine." Sloane wouldn't stop, kept pleading, "I'll just borrow it for a few days. I promise I'll take good care of it." Jamie kept shaking his head, hugging the binder tighter to his chest, and said, "I'm sorry, but I don't let anyone borrow this one. Pick a different one. I have lots of pretty ones." I stood in the kitchen quietly watching. The kid was handling it perfectly, giving a polite refusal, offering a reason, and suggesting an alternative solution. Everything I'd taught my son about how to say no respectfully, Jamie was applying correctly. I was proud of him, but then Sloane started sniffling. Her eyes turned red, tears rolling down her cheeks. That's what Sloane always did whenever she didn't get what she wanted. And it always worked on Grandma and Grandpa, on Dad, on everyone. I sighed, about to step in and intervene. But before I could put down my dish towel, Sloane reached out and grabbed the corner of the binder. And everything started from there. From the kitchen corner, I quickly put down my dish towel and started to step in. But the battle inside had already begun before I could make it out there. Jamie yanked the binder back, jumped up, and yelled, Don't touch my stuff." Sloane wouldn't let go. She gripped the corner of the binder tight, pulled it toward herself, and screamed, "I just want to look closer. I'm not stealing it." The 2 kids were tugging back and forth in the living room. Sloane pulling, Jamie holding on. The binder was being yanked back and forth like a toy between 2 dogs fighting over it. I saw Jamie's face turn bright red, not from anger but from fear. Fear that the binder would tear. Fear that the cards would fall out. Fear of losing the only thing left that connected him to his mom. Jamie yelled again, "Let go!" then jerked hard and ran around the couch. Sloane chased after him, her face flushed red as she screamed, "Selfish! Jamie, you're so selfish." Heavy footsteps thundering. The orange juice glass on the coffee table got knocked over, spilling all over the carpet. The kids' screaming echoed through the house, shattering the warm Christmas atmosphere in an instant. My mom was the first to react. She rushed over, trying to separate them, and said, Now, stop it. You too. Sloane, let go." But the 2 kids were in the middle of their tug of war, neither one hearing anything. Sloane still gripped the binder's corner tight, while Jamie clutched it to his chest like he was protecting treasure. My mom tried to pull Sloane's hands away, but the girl thrashed around, crying and screaming. My dad stood up from his recliner, his face darkening as he bellowed, "Stop it, both of you." His voice was like thunder. The whole room went dead silent. Both kids froze. Jamie was breathing hard, clutching the binder to his chest, eyes red and watery. Sloane let go, too, tears streaming down her face. My dad walked over, and I knew what was about to happen. He was always like that, always the one to step in whenever his grandkids had issues, but every time he'd lean toward Sloane's side. In the past, it was just fighting over cake or arguing about where to sit so Jamie would give in and be done with it. There'd never been a time when both kids would actually get hurt. But nothing lasts forever. When what's being demanded isn't just a regular toy anymore, but the last keepsake from Mom, then Jamie's willingness to give in had reached its limit. He looked down at Jamie, his voice stern as he said, "Let her borrow it. Sloane's your cousin. She'll borrow it and return it." "What's the big deal, making all this noise?" Jamie looked up at Grandpa, tears streaming down his cheeks, his voice shaking. "Grandpa, I can't. This was my mom's. I'll let Sloane look at it, but nobody gets to hold it. If it gets damaged, I don't have a second one." Seeing things weren't going well, I stepped out of the kitchen and spoke up. "Dad, let me handle this." But my dad turned to me with that warning look. That familiar look from when I was little, telling me not to interfere, telling me to let him handle it. And I stopped. I thought Dad would be fair about it. I thought he was the adult. He'd understand what that card meant to Jamie. I trusted him, like I trusted him my whole life, so I stepped back and waited. My dad turned back to look at Jamie, his voice colder as he asked, "Are you telling me a no?" Jamie was trembling, but still clutched the binder tight and answered, "I'm sorry, Grandpa. However, I'm not willing to let anyone borrow this one. Any other one's fine, but not this one. My mom told me to take good care of it." My mom stood by the Christmas tree, her hands gripping her apron as she looked at me, her eyes pleading, as if she wanted to say, "Do something." But she didn't dare open her mouth in front of her husband. She was always like that. She spent her whole life wanting to intervene but never dared to. Sloane stood next to Grandpa, still sniffling and crying. The girl knew her tears had power. Every tear that fell made Grandpa lean more toward her side. And Jamie clutched that binder like he was holding on to Mom. The kid's eyes looked up at Grandpa, both scared and pleading, as if he wanted to say, "Grandpa, please understand." But he didn't understand, or he didn't want to understand. I saw my dad's expression change. That look went cold, decisive, as he'd just made a judgment call in his head. Maybe since I'd been part of the Holloway family, nobody had ever dared say no to my dad. It was either do what he said or face the consequences. His orders were law, were truth, were something nobody was allowed to argue with. He ran the family like he used to run the steel mill back in the day. Everything had to follow the procedures he set. But that night, that rigid mindset buried deep in his subconscious made him make a decision none of us could have seen coming. What happened next only took a few seconds. But in my head, everything slowed down. Each moment burned into my memory, never to fade. My dad stepped forward and yanked the binder right out of Jamie's hands. The kid immediately chased after him, grabbing onto his shirt with both hands, pulling him back. I rushed forward right then. But Craig stepped in front of me and said, "Let Dad handle this. He knows how to deal with kids." I pushed Craig's arm away, but those few seconds were enough for my dad to take several more steps toward the fireplace. Jamie screamed, still gripping his shirt tight, "Grandpa, please, give it back. That's my mom's." My dad didn't stop, didn't turn around. He used his hands to pry Jamie's little fingers off his shirt, pushed the kid aside, then walked straight toward the fireplace where the flames were burning bright. In that moment, I understood. I yelled, "Dad, stop," and rushed toward him. But I was standing too far away. He was right next to the fireplace. I saw his arm lift, the binder in his hand like a death sentence. Then he threw it. The binder fell into the fire with a thud. The plastic cover started shrinking immediately, then melted into black, sticky drops that dripped onto the burning coals. The acrid smell of burning plastic rose, stinging our eyes. The flames licked at each page. The plastic card sleeves bubbled up, then shriveled in an instant. Inside, the cardboard cards caught fire immediately, blazing up like paper, the corners curling, the edges turning black and then to ash. I didn't think. A father's instinct, I rushed straight over, dropped to my knees in front of the fireplace, and stuck my hands in to pull the binder out. Fire licked up my arms. Hot, burning, pain like someone was tearing my skin and flesh. My mom screamed and ran over, grabbed my shoulders and pulled me back. "Darren, stop. Have you lost your mind?" She pulled me backward, and I fell. My hands were burned, skin red and blistered, stinging so bad I wanted to scream. But I still tried to reach toward the fireplace, tried to grab whatever was left. Too late. The flames had swallowed everything. I knelt there, helpless, watching 5 years of Jamie's hard work turn to ash. Grace's Charizard was on the first page, so it was one of the last cards the fire touched. The last keepsake from my wife disappeared before my eyes forever. The room went silent to the point of suffocation, only the crackling of flames and the acrid smell of burning plastic. I turned around, looking for Jamie. The kid was standing a few steps from the fireplace, eyes wide open, staring at the flames. The firelight reflected in my son's eyes, but those eyes were empty. Jamie wasn't crying, wasn't screaming, had no expression at all. The kid stood there like a statue, as if his soul had left his body, burned up by the cards in the fireplace. My mom let go of me, walked over, and hugged Jamie. She pulled the kid into her arms, turned him away from the fireplace, whispering, "Don't look anymore. Don't look anymore, sweetie." But Jamie didn't cry in her arms. The kid just stood there, body stiff, eyes still looking toward the flames even though he'd been turned away. Sloane stood frozen in the corner of the room, hands covering her mouth, face white as a sheet. The girl stammered, voice shaking, I didn't want, Grandpa, I just wanted to borrow it." Craig stood next to his daughter, put his hand on Sloane's shoulder, but he didn't say anything, just stayed silent, like what had just happened had nothing to do with him. When the flames had burned everything down, my dad turned around. And what shocked me most was that he was smiling. Smiling as he'd just finished doing the right thing, as he'd just taught the kids a valuable lesson. He looked at Jamie, his voice calm as he said, "There, that's a lesson about sharing and respecting adults. You don't get to say no to me, understand?" Jamie didn't answer. The kid couldn't answer. My son's eyes were still empty, looking right through Grandpa, as if he were looking at a stranger. I looked at my dad, the man I'd called Dad for 34 years, the man I'd once respected, spent my whole life trying to please. And for the first time, I didn't recognize him anymore. There are pains in this life you can never forget. I used to think losing my wife was the worst thing life could throw at me. But that night, watching my son's empty eyes stare into those flames, I realized I was wrong. The emotion felt like a monster locked in a cage too long, finally let loose and wanting to tear everything apart. And I couldn't keep my cool anymore. I stood up slowly. My hands were burned, skin blistered, but I didn't feel pain. The rage inside me had swallowed every other feeling. I looked straight into my dad's eyes, my voice shaking but clear with every word. "Get out of my house." My dad blinked, as if he'd just heard a joke, and asked back, "What did you say?" I repeated it, slower this time, word by word. I said, "Get out of my house. All of you, right now." He laughed dismissively, the laugh of someone who didn't believe what they just heard, and said, "You're kicking out your parents over some stupid cards?" I took a deep breath, trying to control myself so I wouldn't scream. "You just burned the last keepsake from my wife. Burned 5 years of my son's hard work. And you call that a lesson?" My mom was still holding Jamie, tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice shaking. "Darren, calm down, honey." I turned to Mom, nearly yelling, "Calm down? Are you telling me to calm down? Look at my son. Look at him." Jamie was still standing there in Grandma's arms, eyes wide open but seeing nothing, like a doll with its soul ripped out. Craig spoke up from the corner of the room, his voice sounding like he was talking about the weather. "You're overreacting. It's just toys. Buy him new ones." I whipped around toward Craig, blood rushing to my face. "Buy new ones? Can you buy back his mom's memories? Can you buy back 5 years of him saving every penny? Can you buy back those nights he whispered good night to his mother?" Craig went silent, his face going a little pale, but still no apology. I walked over to my mom, gently took Jamie from her arms. The kid was light as a feather, didn't resist, didn't react, like a lifeless shell. I held my son close, then looked straight at my dad's face and said, "Get out of my house, right now, before I call the police." My dad stood there for a while, his eyes narrowing like he was weighing whether I'd actually do it. Then he turned away, back still straight, and walked out the door without another word. My mom cried as she walked past the door. She turned back to look at me one more time, her eyes full of pain and regret, but she didn't dare stay. Craig swore as he walked past me, muttering something about ungrateful son, and tearing apart the family over garbage. Sloane went last. The girl stopped in front of me, eyes red and puffy, voice whispering, "I'm sorry, Uncle Darren. I'm sorry. I didn't know Grandpa would do that." I didn't answer. Not because I hated the girl, but because I had no strength left to say anything. The door closed. Car engines started, then faded away. Christmas was over. And right then, when the house fell silent, Jamie started crying. Not sniffling, but sobbing, from deep in his chest, like everything the kid had been holding back finally broke loose all at once. Jamie cried like he couldn't believe it was real. Cried as he'd just lost his mom all over again. The kid screamed through his sobs, "Mommy! Mommy! Mommy's card." I held my son tight, sat down on the floor right in the middle of the living room, whispered hopeless apologies. Jamie cried for almost an hour, then fell asleep in my arms. I carried the kid to the couch, covered him with a blanket, then sat there watching him sleep all night. The fireplace had been out for hours, just black ash and the smell of burned plastic still lingering in the air. That night lasted like a century. I couldn't sleep, just sat there watching my son occasionally jerk awake in his dreams. Tears still pooled in the corners of his eyes. My hands were throbbing, but I kept sitting there, thinking about what had just happened, about what I'd have to do next. The next morning, when the first sunlight came through the curtains, the doorbell rang. I got up, walked like a machine, opened it, and saw my mom standing there, alone, holding a bag of medicine. She didn't say much. She stepped inside, looked at my hands that had swollen red after a night without care, then quietly led me to the kitchen. She washed the burns, applied medicine, and bandaged them carefully. After that, she went to the kitchen and made soup for Jamie. I stood leaning against the kitchen doorway, watching her, and asked, "Why did you come here?" She looked at me, eyes red and puffy, her voice soft as a breath. "I'm not taking your father's side. But I can't abandon you and my grandson right now either." She paused, swallowed, and continued, "I'm sorry. I should have stopped your father." I asked, my voice not hiding the bitterness, "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a long time. Her hands stirred the soup pot, but her eyes looked far away. Then she said, her voice so small I had to lean in to hear clearly, "I've lived over 40 years never daring to argue with your father. I don't know how." That afternoon, after my mom went home, I took Jamie to Riverside Hospital to check the burns on my hands. The doctor rebandaged the wound, prescribed medication, and provided instructions on care. On the way home, I didn't drive straight back. I turned into the police station on High Street. I sat in that station, writing a complaint against my own father for willful destruction of property. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but because I knew that after today, there would be no going back. After more than 2 weeks of investigation, the police completed their file. My dad was charged with willful destruction of property, a felony under Ohio law, because the value exceeded $7,000. From the day the family found out I called the police, a silent war broke out behind my back. Craig posted on Facebook, calling me a traitor. Relatives took sides, and the phone rang constantly with cursing, persuasion, and threats. But I didn't care. The only thing I cared about was Jamie. The kid completely changed after that night. My son started hiding everything he treasured. Mom's photo, Jamie shoved it under his bed. His favorite book was tucked behind the closet. One time, I walked into his room and saw him holding Grace's old teddy bear. The moment he saw me, the kid jumped and hid it, eyes like a wild animal afraid of losing the last thing it had. At school, his teacher called me. She said Jamie sat alone in the corner of the classroom, wouldn't play with anyone, and wouldn't talk to anyone. During recess, the kid just sat staring out the window. The psychologist called it trust trauma. When loved ones betray you, a child loses the ability to trust. Jamie was scared that if anyone knew what he treasured, they'd take it away. So the kid hid everything. Hid objects, hid emotions, hid himself. After hearing the doctor's explanation, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, unable to start the engine, and just rested my head on the steering wheel. In the middle of all this chaos, my mom still came to visit every week. She was the only one who didn't cut off contact. One afternoon, after Jamie had gone upstairs, she sat down next to me and asked, "Do you know how Sloane's doing?" I shook my head. Honestly, I hadn't thought about the girl since that night. My mom sighed, her voice heavy. She's broken too, Darren. In a different way. Jamie hid everything because he was scared of losing it. And Sloane? The girl no longer dared to want anything. My mom told me that at school, when friends asked Sloane, "What do you want to eat?" the girl answered, "Whatever." Craig asked his daughter, "What do you want for your birthday?" Sloane shook her head and told Dad, "I don't need anything." The girl started apologizing constantly, even when she hadn't done anything wrong, apologizing for wanting something and apologizing for simply being there. A 12-year-old kid was carrying the weight of guilt on her shoulders that no adult would take responsibility for. And Craig? He didn't notice his daughter was falling apart. He was busy cursing me out online. And my dad? He stayed silent. Not one word of apology. Not one phone call to check on his grandson. 2 kids were broken. And the adults who caused the mess were still busy arguing about who was right and who was wrong. 6 months passed with wounds that couldn't heal. My son still went to school, still ate, still slept, but everything was like a machine. Every time he walked past the fireplace, the one that had consumed his whole childhood, Jamie walked faster, his eyes looking down at the floor, as if he were scared that looking at it would bring back the flames from that night. Then Judgment Day finally came. The trial was held at Franklin County Court. My dad pled guilty, paid $15,000 in compensation, and accepted 2 years of probation. Throughout the entire trial, he never once looked toward Jamie and me. After the judge announced the sentence, I led Jamie out to the hallway. And in the far corner, Sloane stood there alone back against the wall. The 2 kids looked at each other. 6 months ago, they were still chasing each other around my house. That day, they stood apart like strangers. But sometimes, kids are braver than adults. Sloane stepped forward first, her voice shaking as she asked Jamie, "Jamie, do you hate me?" Jamie was quiet for a long time. I saw the kid swallow, his eyes gradually turning red. Then my son looked at his cousin and said, "I don't know. I want to hate you, but you're hurting too." Hearing that, Sloane cried as she'd never been allowed to cry. The girl sobbed and said to Jamie, "I'm sorry. I didn't know Grandpa would do that. I wish I'd never asked for that card." Jamie didn't say anything, but the kid stepped forward and hugged his cousin. 2 kids hugged each other in the cold courthouse hallway. One had lost trust. One carried guilt. Both were victims. I looked toward the corner of the hallway. My dad stood there watching his 2 grandchildren hug each other. That rigid demeanor, that "I'm always right" attitude he'd carried his whole life had disappeared. All that was left was an older man with wet eyes. My mom told me later that night, for the first time in over 40 years of living together, she saw my dad cry. Maybe even people who've been through life's ups and downs can't see their own mistakes. It takes children to wake up the conscience of a 68-year-old man. In the months after the trial, my mom told me about Dad, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It started with Sloane. One night, my mom heard strange sounds from her granddaughter's room. She opened the door and found Sloane sitting crying in front of a broken piggy bank, coins and bills scattered all over the floor. The girl had smashed all her savings, trying to figure out if she had enough to buy back those cards to make it up to Jamie. My dad stood in the doorway, silently watching his granddaughter. Sloane looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I don't have enough money. It's my fault you had to go to court. It's my fault Jamie lost everything." My mom said that night my dad didn't sleep. The next morning, he did something he'd never done in his life. He knelt next to Sloane, hugged his granddaughter and said, "It's not your fault. It's mine." From then on, the 2 of them started learning about Pokemon. My dad, who used to call Jamie's collection meaningless pieces of paper, spent hours with Sloane learning how to tell real cards from fake ones. He withdrew his savings and bought cards one by one. Sloane added her pocket money to it. And Craig? It wasn't until the doctor said straight out that Sloane was suffering from severe anxiety disorder that he realized how badly he'd neglected his daughter. The first month after the trial, my dad called me. I let it ring until it stopped. The second month, he came to my front door. Jamie looked through the window and saw him standing in the blazing sun. Then he pulled the curtains shut and went upstairs. I opened the door. My dad said, "Let me see Jamie. Just 5 minutes." I looked at him, hair grayer, back more hunched, and shook my head. "Jamie's not ready. Neither am I." He stood there for 15 minutes, then walked away. Starting in the 3rd month, he began sending letters. 1 envelope each month. Inside was a card and a handwritten note. "I'm sorry. I'm trying to find what I took away from you. The envelopes piled up on Jamie's desk. The kid didn't open them but looked at them every day. Fall came. The 4th, 5th, and 6th envelopes arrived. One day, I saw my son sitting in front of a pile of envelopes, holding one and gazing at Grandpa's handwriting for a long time. I asked, "Do you want to open it?" Jamie shook his head. "I'm not ready, Dad." Then the kid added, his voice quieter, "But I'm not throwing them away." Forgiveness was Jamie's right, not his obligation. But that statement showed me something was changing in the kid's heart. Then December came. Snow is falling thickly outside the window, almost a year after that fateful night. And one evening, when the doorbell rang, Jamie did something I never expected. After all those times my dad reached out, those letters sent regularly every month, I thought the kid would refuse forever. I'd prepared myself for the possibility that maybe Jamie would never forgive, and I accepted that. But I didn't know kids are often stronger than adults think. The burns on my hands had healed, leaving just faint scars. And the kid's heart, maybe it was healing in its own way, too. One evening in early December, the doorbell rang. I stood up to answer it, but Jamie was faster. The kid walked to the door, looked through the peephole. I saw my son stand there for a few seconds, as if he were lost in thought. Then the kid slowly opened the door. Outside, the whole family stood there. My parents, Craig and Sloan. Snow covered their shoulders. My dad held a small wooden box, hands shaking from cold or nervousness. I couldn't tell. Jamie looked at Grandpa, then looked at Sloan. The two kids nodded hello to each other, awkward but no longer distant. Then my son said, his voice small but clear, "Come in, Grandpa. Come in, everyone." I stood behind them, didn't say anything. This was my son's decision. In the living room, everyone sat down. The atmosphere was still awkward, but no longer filled with hatred. Craig looked at me, nodded slightly. Not an apology, but an acknowledgement. My mom held my hand, her eyes welling up with tears. My dad opened the wooden box in front of Jamie. Inside were 15 rare cards, everything he and Sloan had found over the past year. He looked at his grandson, his voice shaking as he said, "I couldn't find a Charizard like your mom's. That kind, there are only a few left in the whole world." I tried. "I'm sorry." Jamie didn't say, "I forgive you." It wasn't time yet. But the kid stood up, went upstairs, and brought down the pile of unopened envelopes. Then my son sat next to him, opened each envelope, and read every line of handwriting. Sloan sat beside them, silently watching. When he finished reading, Jamie led Grandpa upstairs. On the shelf, a new binder, much thinner than before. The first page was left blank. Jamie pointed to the blank page and said to him, "I'm saving this spot for the Charizard. I know no card is like Mom's, but someday I'll find one, and I'll tell it about Mom." My dad looked at the blank page, then looked at me, then looked at his grandson, his eyes red as he said, "I'll help you find one if you'll let me." "I'm sorry, Darren." Jamie nodded, and I didn't turn away anymore. Ultimately, I realized that not all wounds heal completely. Not all mistakes are forgiven right away. But sometimes you need a door to open. Time takes care of the rest. What about you? If you were in my situation, would you be able to forgive? Does Grandpa deserve a second chance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video to support us in bringing more meaningful stories like this. Thanks for listening. See you in the following stories. On Christmas night, in front of nearly 30 relatives, my dad looked straight at my 7-year-old daughter and said harshly, "A failure like you doesn't get to sit near me. So embarrassing." The world around me seemed to stop after that cruel statement from my dad. My daughter stood frozen. Her little hand slowly let go of the chair back, dropping to her side like a puppet with cut strings. Her eyes went wide, vacant, unblinking. Her lips started trembling, and I could see tears beginning to well up in those eyes. My daughter tried to say something. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She just stood there, in the crowded room, alone, humiliated in front of all our relatives. And then the first tear rolled down her cheek. In that moment, my blood boiled. And that's when I knew the relationship between Riley and me and my family might fall apart. Before I get into the details of this story, Thanks for choosing to listen to us today. I hope you have a peaceful day. And don't forget to give me a like if you want to wish me good things too. Hello everyone. I'm Daniel Morrison, 41 years old. I'm an accountant at a small company in Denver, Colorado. My job doesn't bring in a high income, but I love what I do, and I'm proud of the work I do every day. I'm a single dad, living with my daughter Riley. To me, Riley is my whole world. She's the reason I wake up every morning, the motivation that gets me through the hardest days, and the only source of light in my life after my wife passed away. Sarah, my wife, died in 2019 in a car accident. Riley was only 4 at the time. She was too young to understand why Mom would never come home again. During those first months after the funeral, Riley would stand by the window waiting, asking me when Mom was coming back. Every time that happened, my heart felt like it was being torn apart. After Sarah passed, I promised myself I'd take really good care of Riley. I'd protect her from all harm and love her twice as much to make up for Mom's absence. But then 3 years ago, I failed to keep that promise. I brought her to my parents' house for the Christmas party. And at that party, my daughter, my innocent 7-year-old, had to endure insults that no child should ever have to hear. The story I'm sharing today took place on Christmas 2022. Riley was just 7 years old. During the nearly 20-mile drive from our house to my parents', Riley sat in the back seat. Her eyes lit up with that excitement kids get during the holidays. About 10 minutes into the drive, Riley suddenly asked me, "Dad, does Mom celebrate Christmas in heaven?" Hearing that question, my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Every Christmas, she asks about her mom, and every time, I have to hold back my emotions to answer her as calmly as possible. I tried to keep my voice gentle and answered, "Of course she does, sweetie. Mom's celebrating Christmas with the angels. And she's looking down, seeing how beautiful you are. I'm sure she's very proud." Hearing my answer, Riley smiled. Then she turned to look at the scenery along the road and started quietly singing a Christmas song. In that moment, I felt this overwhelming longing. Sarah wasn't here anymore to see our daughter grow up, to witness Riley's first steps into life with me. I was the only one left, trying to be both father and mother to her. During those months, I always believed that my parents and brother would love Riley more and would understand what my brother and I were going through. After all, they were still family, still blood. During that entire drive, I had no idea that in just a few minutes, my whole family would humiliate my 7-year-old daughter in front of nearly 30 guests. Around 5 in the afternoon, I parked in front of my parents' house. Riley jumped out of the car, grabbed my hand tight, and pulled me toward the front door. As soon as we walked in, I saw Alex with his wife, Jessica, and their 2 children, 8-year-old Brian and 10-year-old Jordan. They were sitting in the living room. Alex is my older brother, 4 years older than me. He owns his own company, making over $300,000 a year. The relationship between us has never been good. Alex always shows off his wealth and likes to lecture me about everything, from work to parenting. In his eyes, I'm the loser brother who doesn't know how to make money, doesn't know how to succeed. His wife Jessica is just as arrogant as her husband. Alex is the pot, and Jessica is the perfect lid. The best thing about them is that they constantly invest heavily in Brian and Jordan. Both kids have won many awards at school, and Alex and Jessica never miss a chance to brag about it. As soon as Brian and Jordan saw Riley, the 2 kids ran over, grabbed Riley's hands, and their voices were full of excitement. Brian smiled and said to Riley, "Riley, we've been waiting for you since this morning. I got you a present." Jordan nodded enthusiastically, too, pulling Riley toward the Christmas tree, where they'd hidden a small gift for their cousin. Seeing that scene, my heart warmed up. At least Riley had cousins who cared about her. Regardless of what their parents were like, Brian and Jordan were still good kids who loved their cousin. In that moment, I thought this year's party would be okay. But I was wrong. After greeting some relatives in the living room, I went to find Dad. When I saw him, he was standing in the backyard, talking with some relatives. As soon as she saw Grandpa, Riley let go of my hand, ran over with a bright smile, and said in her clear voice, "Hi, Grandpa. Merry Christmas." Dad just nodded coldly, didn't respond to his granddaughter. He didn't even look at Riley. his eyes still directed at me with that familiar judgmental look. Riley stood there, her smile fading. She didn't understand why Grandpa was reacting in that way. I pulled her toward me, feeling annoyed. A few seconds later, Dad said to me with a proud voice, "Brian just won first place in the school chess competition. Jordan came in second place in the county debate contest. Those kids are really talented." Hearing Dad praise Alex's 2 kids, I nodded, not knowing what to say. And then, suddenly, Dad glanced at Riley and asked directly, "Why doesn't Riley have any awards? You should push her to study more instead of letting her doodle around." Hearing that, anger started simmering inside me. I tried to stay calm and replied, "Riley develops in her own way, Dad. Not every kid has to be the same. She likes to draw, and she draws beautifully." Dad snorted, his face full of annoyance at my answer. He said harshly, "You always make excuses for failure." Just then, Mom's voice called out from inside the house, calling everyone in for Christmas dinner. The argument was cut short, but the atmosphere had already become tense. I took Riley's hand and led her inside, my heart heavy with the feeling that dinner wouldn't go smoothly. Dinner started with a big crowd. Nearly 30 people were at the party, all relatives who'd come from everywhere to gather. My parents' large dining room was filled to the brim. Laughter and chatter filled the air, glasses clinking, the smell of roasted turkey and apple pie mixing to create that classic Christmas atmosphere. The long table was elaborately set with white tablecloths and steaming dishes. Everyone was finding their seats, chairs scraping across the wooden floor. I stood in the back, one hand on Riley's shoulder, watching her look for a seat. She looked around, her big, round eyes scanning each familiar face. Then her gaze stopped at an empty chair next to my dad. After finding her spot, Riley let go of my hand and walked quickly toward that chair. Her steps were light, eager like a little squirrel. She put her hand on the back of the chair, pulled it out and got ready to sit down. And then my dad's voice rang out, cutting through every sound in the room like a sharp blade, "Hold on." After my dad's command, Riley stopped, her hand still on the back of the chair. She looked up at my dad, her eyes wide with confusion. Dad looked straight at Riley. He spoke slowly but coldly, "You can't sit here." The whole room suddenly went silent. Nearly 30 pairs of eyes turned toward my dad and Riley. Riley stood there, her small hand still gripping the chair back. She blinked a few times, not understanding what was happening. A few seconds later, her voice trembled as she asked again, each word coming out with difficulty. "Why, Grandpa? I wanted to sit near you." I stood a few steps away, my heart starting to race. A bad feeling rose in my chest. I wanted to step forward, wanted to pull Riley toward me, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. Dad slowly set his wine glass down on the table. His movement was deliberate, as if he were preparing to announce something important. Then he raised his head, looking straight into his 7-year-old granddaughter's face. And then, in front of all the guests, in front of nearly 30 relatives, my dad said straight to Riley's face in a voice loud enough for the entire room to hear clearly, "A failure like you doesn't get to sit near me. So embarrassing." The world around me seemed to stop after that cruel statement from my dad. I saw Riley standing frozen. Her little hand slowly let go of the chair back, dropping to her side like a puppet with cut strings. Her eyes went wide, vacant, unblinking. Her lips started trembling, and I could see tears beginning to well up in those eyes. She tried to say something. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She just stood there, in the crowded room, alone, humiliated in front of all our relatives. And then the first tear rolled down her cheek. In that moment, my blood boiled. And that's when I knew the relationship between Riley and me and my family might fall apart. After witnessing Riley being humiliated, I stepped forward, each step heavy on the wooden floor. The crowd automatically parted to make way. I walked past stunned faces, averted eyes, until I stood right in front of Dad. And I yelled. I yelled straight into his face, my voice echoing through the room like thunder. "What the hell did you just say to my daughter?" After my yell, the entire room shook. Someone dropped a fork, the metal hitting the porcelain plate with a sharp ring in the silence. I'd never dared to raise my voice at Dad like that. For 38 years, as his son, I'd always been the obedient child, constantly bowing my head to his scolding. But today was different. Today, he'd gone after my daughter. While my dad was still surprised that I dared to react, I yelled in his face again. Dad, I'm demanding you apologize to Riley right now. Right now. After my demand, Dad looked at me with cold, sharp eyes, full of challenge. He showed no regret or wavering. Instead, he raised his head high, his voice hard as steel when he shot back. I told the truth. You want me to lie? Look at Brian and Jordan, who took first place in chess and second place in debate. Then look at your kid. What does she have? Aren't you ashamed? As soon as Dad finished speaking, I immediately replied, Riley is only 7 years old. 7, do you understand? She lost her mom when she was 4. She's been through enough already. And now you're calling her a failure in front of all our relatives? Hearing what I said, Dad snorted and replied, So what if she lost her mom? Is that a reason for her not to try? Is that a reason for you to spoil her? Let her grow up to be useless like you? Every word he said was like a knife stabbing into my chest. Not only was he insulting my daughter, but he was also insulting me, insulting the entire life I'd lived. Seeing the tension between Dad and me, Mom stepped in and said, Come on, Daniel, calm down. Dad wants what's best for Riley. Dad wants Riley to strive for more. What's wrong with that? I looked at Mom, and I couldn't believe what I just heard. I said harshly, You call humiliating a 7-year-old child in front of all our relatives wanting what's best for her? My question made Mom go silent. Alex also stood up now, stepped over to stand next to Dad. He looked at me with that familiar condescending look. He said to me in a lecturing tone, Dad's right, Daniel. You keep spoiling her like that, she'll never amount to anything. Look at Brian and Jordan. They got where they are today because Jessica and I disciplined them from a young age. As soon as Alex finished, Jessica nodded in agreement, then added in a cold voice, To be honest, Daniel, we don't let Brian and Jordan play with Riley much because we're afraid it'll affect their studies. Do you understand? You should worry about your own kid instead of standing here blaming Mom and Dad. Every word they said was like stones thrown in my face. I looked at Alex, then at Jessica, and finally at my parents. The 4 of them stood there like a solid wall. They were my family, and they were all standing on one side, justifying hurting my daughter. After our argument, the room started getting noisy again as guests began taking sides. Some older people nodded in agreement with my dad. A distant uncle stood up, his voice pompous. That's right, kids need discipline. When we were little, getting spanked was normal. What's the big deal? Daniel, you should listen to your dad. Don't be so sensitive. As soon as he finished, Cousin stood up to defend me. He said, saying that to a 7-year-old is too much. No matter what, you can't call your own granddaughter a failure in front of everyone. She lost her mom when she was little, too. Do you think about how much she's already endured? My cousin's words made my dad angry. He yelled, This is my family business. Who permitted you to butt in? Who the hell are you to lecture me? My cousin immediately shot back. I'm someone with a conscience. I can't just sit here and watch you treat a child like that. The room started becoming chaotic. Arguments broke out everywhere. Some defending Dad, some defending me, voices shouting over each other. Someone pounded the table. Someone pushed their chair back and stood up. Christmas dinner had turned into a battlefield. In the middle of all that chaos, I turned to look for Riley. She wasn't standing in the same spot anymore. My heart seemed to skip a beat as I frantically looked around. Then I saw her. Riley had backed into a corner of the room, curled up like a small wounded animal. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, face buried in her thighs, shoulders shaking. The noise of the crowd drowned out her sobbing. No one was paying attention to her. No one cared that, in the middle of this adult war, a 7-year-old child was falling apart. And then I noticed something that warmed my heart amidst the storm. Brian and Jordan had quietly left their parents' side. The 2 kids were sitting next to Riley in the darkest corner of the room, out of sight from the adults. Brian was holding Riley's hand, while Jordan was using his sleeve to wipe the tears from my daughter's face. I heard Jordan's voice saying to Riley, Don't cry anymore, Riley. Grandpa was wrong. You're not a failure. You're the most amazing cousin we have. Brian nodded, gripping Riley's hand tighter, and said, Yeah, don't listen to Grandpa. We love you. You're really talented. You draw way better than we do." Hearing those encouraging words, Riley looked up at her two cousins, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She didn't say anything, just nodded slightly, then buried her face in her knees again. Watching that scene, a thought flashed through my mind. In this family, the children were the ones with the warmest hearts. While the adults were tearing each other apart over pride and opinions, 3 kids were comforting each other in a corner, away from the storm that the adults had created. I took a deep breath. The anger inside me was still there, but now it had settled, making room for an iron determination. And I knew what I had to do. Ignoring the people still arguing, I walked through the crowd to Riley. I knelt, hugged her close, and used my hand to wipe the tears from her cheeks. My voice whispered in Riley's ear, trying to comfort her. "It's okay. I'm here. I won't let anyone hurt you anymore." Riley was still crying, her arms wrapped tightly around my neck, like she was afraid of being abandoned. Feeling her small body trembling in my arms, a decision formed clearly in my mind. I stood up, turned to face my parents and Alex. The room gradually fell silent as everyone realized I was about to say something important. I looked straight into Dad's eyes, then at Mom, then at Alex. My voice rang out clear and decisive. "From today on, I'm cutting ties with this family. I will never let my daughter be humiliated again." The entire room seemed to freeze after the words I'd just spoken. Mom burst into tears, stepped toward me, her voice pleading, "Daniel, think about this again." Dad spoke harshly, "Yes, but it's because he loves Riley and wants Riley to be better. Don't break up the family over this." As soon as Mom finished, I shook my head and replied, "Loves Riley? Calling Riley a failure in front of all our relatives is loving Riley? Do you know what you're saying?" Dad interrupted the conversation. He said harshly to me, "You want to leave? Then leave. Don't come back. I don't have a failure of a son like you." As soon as Dad finished, Alex laughed mockingly and said to me, "You always like to overreact. Dad just said a few words and you're already like this. Really can't handle pressure." After everything they said, I didn't respond. I took Riley's hand and led her toward the door. Each step felt like it carried the weight of a life-changing decision. But I didn't regret it. My daughter was more important than any relationship. Even if they were my father, my mother, the people who raised me when I was small, I was ready to cut all ties. Just as Riley and I reached the door, something no one expected happened. The sound of small feet running frantically behind us. Chairs are being pushed over. Someone yelling, "Jordan, Brian, come back here right now." Instinctively, I turned around. I saw Brian and Jordan holding hands tightly as they walked toward their grandparents and parents. Then they stopped, standing right in the middle of the living room, facing the adults. Their faces were flushed red, but their eyes were full of determination. Those were eyes I'd never seen on these 2 kids before. Children who were always obedient, always compliant, constantly bowing their heads to every adult demand. Jordan, the older one, took a deep breath. Then he spoke, his voice shaking but not weak. "I have something to say." The entire room once again fell into silence. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that comes before a big storm. Alex stepped forward, pointing at Jordan and yelling, "Jordan, go back to your seat right now. This isn't your business. You don't get to interfere in adult matters." But Jordan didn't back down. He stood firm, his feet like roots planted in the floor. For the first time in his life, he didn't bow his head to his father's yelling. He looked straight into Alex's eyes, and I saw something breaking in those 10-year-old eyes. And then Jordan spoke, each word like it had been compressed for too long. "No, Dad, I'm going to speak. I've been silent for too long." Then he turned to look at his grandparents, glanced around the room, and took in all the stunned faces. His voice rang out, "I'm so tired." Those words echoed through the room like a bell. I saw Alex flinch. Jessica brought her hand to her mouth. A few seconds later, Jordan continued with a slightly trembling voice. "I have to study from morning to night. Every day. No days off. Wake up at 6, study until 11 at night. Math, English, science, history, followed by debate practice, then extra lessons, and finally tutoring. I don't have time to play. I don't have friends. I can't even remember the last time I watched cartoons." Hearing Jordan's words, Jessica interrupted, her voice shaking. "Jordan, honey, We do this because we want what's best for you, but Jordan didn't let Jessica finish. He shook his head and replied, Best for me? Do you know I cry alone in my room every night? Do you know I hate waking up every morning because I know another long day is waiting? Do you know I wish I weren't born into this family? That last sentence was like a bomb exploding in the room. Jessica staggered and had to grab the chair to keep from falling. Alex stood there like he'd been nailed down, his face pale as death. Jordan wasn't done yet. He turned to look at Riley in my arms, then continued with a choked voice. I just want to be like Riley. I look at her, and she gets love from Uncle Daniel. She gets to play, draw, and do what she likes. She smiles so much. I can't remember the last time I really smiled. As Jordan finished speaking, an emotion suddenly surged in my heart. I felt genuine pity for a child who never had a real childhood. And then, a few seconds later, Jordan looked straight into his parents' eyes and said, I want you to love me, not force me to study all day. I want you to hug me and tell me I'm great. Not because I won awards, but just because I'm your son. Am I asking for too much? I want to be loved. Jordan's voice broke on the last sentence. He couldn't hold it in anymore, burst into sobs, his small shoulders shaking. After Jordan finished, Brian also started speaking. He looked at Alex, then at Jessica and said, I hate those awards. Hearing Brian speak, Alex looked like he'd been slapped. He stuttered, Brian, what are you saying? You won first place in chess. We're so proud of you. Brian shook his head, tears streaming down his cheeks, and continued, I don't want to play chess. I hate chess. Every time I sit at the board, I want to knock everything over and run away. But I don't dare, because I know if I don't win, you'll be disappointed. You'll look at me with those eyes, the eyes I'm most afraid of. Jessica stepped forward, wanting to hug Brian, but Brian stepped back, avoiding his mother. That action made Jessica freeze, as if someone had thrown water in her face. And then, Brian's voice broke. He sobbed and said, I want you to hug me. Please tell me I'm great without me having to do anything. I want you to play with me for just one day without talking about grades, without mentioning awards, and without discussing the future. Is that so hard? Is that so hard, Mom and Dad? That final question was like a desperate cry for help echoing through the room. Alex stood there, his arms hanging limply at his sides. I looked at my brother, the man who'd always been proud of his success, of his excellent children, now standing like a broken statue. His lips moved, wanting to say something, but no sound came out. Jessica was crying now. She no longer had that arrogant look, no longer those contemptuous eyes. She was just a mother who just realized how much she'd hurt her children. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with her expensive makeup to create dark streaks across her face. My parents were equally shaken. My dad, the man who just called my daughter a failure, now stood there with his face darkened. He looked at Brian and Jordan, then turned to look at Riley in my arms. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes, something that wasn't hardness or contempt. Maybe it was regret. Perhaps it was pain. Possibly it was realizing that he was wrong, completely and utterly wrong. Mom had been crying for who knows how long. She looked at Brian, looked at Jordan, then at Riley, then at me. Her eyes were full of pain and helplessness. A few seconds later, Dad slowly walked toward Riley and me. His steps were heavy. He stopped a few steps away from me, looking down at Riley. Riley was still in my arms, face buried in my chest, not daring to look at my dad. I felt her body curl up when she heard Grandpa's footsteps approaching. Dad reached out his hand, wanting to touch Riley. His voice was hoarse, no longer steel-hard like before. He said to my daughter, Riley, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Hearing my dad's words, Riley fearfully buried herself deeper into my chest, both hands gripping my shirt tightly. She was trembling, shaking her head constantly, not daring to look at him. Immediately, I stood in front of my daughter, one arm holding Riley, one hand raised to stop Dad. I said curtly, it's too late, Dad. Dad stopped, his hand still suspended in the air, unable to reach Riley. After a few seconds of silence, I looked straight into Dad's eyes and continued slowly but clearly. What you said today, she'll remember for the rest of her life. Do you know that? Kids don't forget. They'll grow up, they'll mature, but the wounds from childhood will follow them forever. My words made my dad collapse. That's when he realized how wrong he'd been. Mom stepped forward, grabbed my sleeve and said, "Daniel, please, your dad was wrong. He knows he was wrong. Give him a chance to make it right. Our family can still heal." I gently removed Mom's hand, shook my head, and replied, "Families don't treat each other like this. Families don't call a child a failure. Families don't turn a Christmas dinner into a nightmare for a 7-year-old." I turned to look around the room. The relatives' faces were some stunned, some crying, and some with heads bowed, unable to look. Then I looked at Brian and Jordan. The two children were still standing there, holding hands. They'd said what they'd never dared say before. They'd exposed their wounds in front of everyone. And they'd done it for Riley, for their cousin. I nodded to the two of them, my eyes saying the thanks my mouth couldn't speak. Then I turned around, picked up Riley, and walked toward the door. Christmas dinner that year was over for the two of us. Before we could step out onto the porch, the sound of small feet running after us echoed from behind. Brian ran up and grabbed my sleeve. He said to me, "Uncle Daniel, can we come to your house to play with Riley?" I stopped walking, looked down at my 8-year-old nephew. Then I turned to look at Riley. She was also looking at Brian, and after a moment of hesitation, Riley nodded gently. I smiled, put my hand on Brian's shoulder, and replied, "Of course. My house always welcomes you." Jordan also ran over and stood next to Brian. The two looked at me, then held out their fists the way kids do when they're promising something important. Jordan said to me, "Promise." Seeing that sweet gesture, I also made a fist and bumped it gently against both kids' hands. It was a commitment, a promise between people who understood each other. After my promise, Brian and Jordan pulled out 2 handmade cards from their pockets and gave them to Riley. The cards were carefully cut and pasted, featuring humorous drawings and uneven handwriting. Riley took them and read the words on the cards. "Riley is the most amazing cousin. We love you." For the first time since being scolded by Grandpa, Riley smiled a little. She hugged the 2 cards to her chest, looking at Brian and Jordan with grateful eyes. That scene brought tears to the eyes of many people in the room. Those who had supported me wiped their eyes, and some who had initially sided with Dad also had to reconsider. In the middle of all the chaos and pain of that Christmas night full of family drama, the love between the children was the only thing that was pure and beautiful. I took Riley's hand, nodded to Brian and Jordan, then walked out of the house. The door closed behind us, and I knew a new chapter in my and Riley's lives had begun. 3 years have passed since that Christmas night. The relationship between my parents and me, as well as Alex's, remains distant. We don't see each other during holidays, we don't call to wish each other happy birthdays, and we don't have family gatherings like we used to. Alex and Jessica have attempted to reconcile on multiple occasions. They buy gifts for Riley, including expensive toys and designer clothes. But Riley refuses to accept them all. She doesn't want anything from them. Every time Alex and Jessica want to see Riley, she hides behind me, shaking her head without saying a word. Her fearful eyes make me understand that the wound from that year still hasn't healed. As for my parents, they've also tried every way to mend the relationship. They send gifts, call to apologize, and even come to my door many times. Mom cries and begs me to give them a chance to see their granddaughter. Dad, the hard man he used to be, now stands at my door with a face full of regret. But every time I ask Riley if she wants to see Grandma and Grandpa, she shakes her head. One time, when they came unexpectedly, Riley looked at me, her eyes still haunted by memories from years ago, her voice whispering, "I'm still scared of Grandpa, Dad. I don't want to see him." After what she said, I asked my parents to leave. I don't force her. I respect Riley's decision. I understand the wound in her heart still hasn't healed. The words failure from that day were carved deep into her mind, and only time can heal it. Once Mom called me. Her voice choked over the phone when she said, "Daniel, I know we were wrong. Please, convince Riley to give us a chance to make it right. I miss Riley so much. Your dad misses Riley too. He doesn't say it, but I know he regrets it deeply." Hearing those words, I was silent for a long time. I understood Mom's pain, but I also couldn't ignore my daughter's pain. Finally, I replied in a calm but firm voice, "Mom, I respect Riley's decision. I won't interfere in this. When she's ready, she'll decide for herself." After that firm statement from me, Mom sobbed, but I would still respect Riley's decision. For the past 2 Christmas seasons in 2023 and 2024, my parents came to the house trying to convince us to go to the party. They brought gifts, brought apologies, brought tears. But I was determined not to bring Riley back to their house. Not because I wanted to punish my parents, but because I had to protect my daughter. The good thing is that Brian, Jordan, and Riley still maintain their bond. Every weekend, Alex drives Brian and Jordan to my house. He leaves the 2 kids at my place for the day. And I'm happy to be loved by Brian and Jordan. At least to them, I'm a good uncle. I noticed that after that Christmas night, something changed in how Alex and Jessica raised their kids. The 2 children now have time to play, have friends, and are no longer forced to study from morning to night. Maybe Brian and Jordan's words that night woke them up. Riley is now 10 years old. She still loves to draw, and her paintings continue to evolve into increasingly beautiful works. She doesn't have many academic awards like Brian and Jordan, but she's happy. She's loved, respected, and allowed to be herself. And that's what matters most to me. After everything that happened, I've learned many important lessons. I want to share some advice with you based on my own experience. First piece of advice: protect your child at all costs. Family is important, but your child is more important. Second piece of advice: children are innocent. Adults fight, adults have conflicts. That doesn't mean we should stop kids from playing with each other. Brian, Jordan, and Riley have nothing to do with the conflicts between my parents and me, between Alex and me. They deserve to maintain their cousin bond, and I will never take that away from them. Third piece of advice: always respect your child's opinion, even when they're young. Riley is only 10, but she has the right to decide whether she wants to see her grandparents or not. I don't force her, don't persuade her, don't use emotions to make her change. I wait and I respect whatever decision she makes. Some relatives still often tell me I should convince Riley to give my parents a chance. They say that if she disagrees, I should take the initiative and bring her to see her grandparents, whether she wants to or not. But I don't do that. When Riley is ready, she'll open her heart on her own. Currently, my role is to be with her, listen to her, and allow her to heal at her own pace. What about you? Through this story, should I ask Riley to give my family a chance? Should I take the initiative to reconcile? Or should I continue waiting for my daughter to decide for herself? Please share your thoughts. I really want to hear opinions from people who followed this story.